Luke was raised as a Christian in a small country community in southern Australia and spent some of his early years living on an outback cattle station with genuine Indigenous tribes of Northern Australia. Postgraduate research and publications were acquired during university studies, specialising in applied human biomedical science and physical education, as well as pursuit of diverse interests in philosophy, religion and art, ultimately drawing Luke to Gurdjieff's system, where he has been a practitioner working with groups and individuals from around Australia and the world since 2000. Luke is a facilitator of the Gurdjieff network and has a blog entitled Faith Made Flesh, exploring some of the ideas and practices of Gurdjieff and Christianity. And I very much look forward to hearing what you've got to say to us this evening, Luke. So welcome, and without further ado, I will pass across to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, David, and thank you for the opportunity to be heard. I thought maybe as a bit of a more of a practical taste into the Gurdjieff work, just to try something with each other initially, and then I can talk a little bit about Gurdjieff, his work and what he brought, and then we can maybe open that up to questions and answers. So if everyone's willing and able, you don't have to do much apart from sit where you are. But many of the Gurdjieff exercises are all about activating one's attention and coming into the body. It's really looking at some of the raw ingredients of consciousness, as he would say, but it's really being able to try to activate this very interesting but mysterious property we call attention. And for Gurdjieff, much of his work is trying to use all one's attention to study all one's attention. It's a very odd thing. So as we sit here, we just try to find just a very supportive posture. We're all in chairs, but we just adjust ourselves. As they say, the body is the temple of the soul. So it's how do we align our temple? And then we just allow the breathing to just find its own natural rhythm, not trying to manipulate anything, but we're just trying to do these small adjustments in our posture to come back to a point where there is the minimum amount of effort just to sit here. Normally that means the spine is vertical. We're sitting squarely in the chair, head resting over the neck. And we're just attempting just to find that the effortless center of gravity. There's nothing really magical in it. I just have this inner sense of where I need to be. And so I just start to quieten naturally. There's something about the energies just coming in rather than always going out, which can just help with a quietness inside. And then I simply try to activate my attention by trying to sense my right hand. Just a very organic sense. Can I sense my hand as it's resting or touching on my leg or wherever it might be? Feeling the pressure. Maybe it's cold, maybe it's hot. But I'm just trying to bring my attention into my right hand, just sensing it. Not trying to think about it or imagine anything, I'm just sensing it. Very much like if you feel pain, your attention goes straight to your pain, but that's normally a reaction. We're trying to do it voluntarily. Can I just sense my hand? Where is it? without looking at it. Sometimes there's a tingling or a warmth. Sometimes I get a sense of the radiant energy, which is heat coming from it. But I'm just trying to sense the hand. And then I try to keep a little bit of attention on that sensation of my right hand and bring it across now to my left hand. Can I sense my right hand and my left hand? Maybe having a sense of the fingers, or the webbing between the fingers, or the palm of the hand, the skin, the muscles. But I'm just trying to connect with this very organic sense. My body is here, even though sometimes my mind can be elsewhere. So I'm just trying to anchor it here, connect with my body. So I'm trying to sense my right hand and my left hand. And now I try to just include my left foot. Can I have a sense of my foot on the ground? The underside of the foot, the top of the foot. Webbing between the toes themselves, all of the skin, pressure maybe. And then I try to bring my attention into my right foot. Trying to sense the skin, toes, webbing between the toes, bottom of the foot, top of the foot. And so my only concern is, can I just sense my feet and my hands? They're very reliable companions because they're always here with us. And I invite them in by connecting with them. And so something we might try during the course of the evening is just to try to stay connected with the feet and hands, or even just one of them, or even just a finger or a toe. But can I remain connected while I'm listening or speaking? Can I just be here in this wonderful gift we call a body? Just to be here. And so in a sense, much of what has been known to be Gurdjieff's work is just that. It's a work. I work at something. I work at staying connected. I work at being in relationship. And that's not easy. It's not easy. So, who was this Gurdjieff character? Short answer to that is, I have no idea. There is a lot that has been written about him, and I don't think we'll quite ever know. But he seemed to have been born somewhere in the Caucasus region, around about the 1860-ish mark, depending upon the author. And at a very early age, because of where he lived and some of the experiences that he had, there were some very strong questions that really didn't seem to leave him alone. The question of what is life's purpose. He was raised as a Christian, an Orthodox Christian, part of the choir, trained by priests, but also he was very interested in science. So caught in the middle, who's right and who's wrong? Well, he didn't really accept any of that. He wanted to find out for himself. So he spent a great deal of time in the company of others at a very young age, traveling all the way through the Middle East and Asia, India, Europe, searching these questions in a very practical way. He felt that there's someone somewhere who must know something. And while he felt the truth in religion and the truth in science, it was very hard for him to reconcile them without some kind of practice or methodology. And so after 20 or so years of searching, he suddenly appeared in Europe, particularly around Russia, just before World War I, where he began to experiment with what he had found. It wasn't quite called the work then. It was recorded by one of his students, Behncke, during the Russian period, the World War I period, as the fourth way. And I'll talk a little bit more about what he brought. And it was interesting because he embarked on his teaching period between world wars. There was a real sense, particularly in Europe, that man was the pinnacle of everything because of the industrialized world. And World War I shattered that. And then it wasn't long after, World War II shattered that even more. And so it was very interesting that his teaching period was between World War I and World War II. So basically, what did he teach? A lot of things, but his main kind of the pillar, if you like, and something which really tore at the heart of people who he encountered, or at least heard him, was that we're fundamentally asleep. We're fundamentally living in a dream world, a world of mechanical association, of habits, of reactions. And it's these reactions and the habitual nature, this very low level of consciousness, which causes us to do all sorts of atrocities, not only to others, but also to ourselves. But the way out was to awaken. Well, what does that mean? Well, Gurdjieff had it in quite a practical sense. We are asleep because we lack a certain quality of energy. We awaken when we're able to cultivate that quality of energy. Something in us can lift. There is a certain quality in us, and we've probably all experienced this in moments when we suddenly become aware of something. Our experience becomes more alive. I came from the sports industry, which talked about being in the zone or flow or peak experiences, where it's like one comes out of this sleep-like state and just sees things very differently. And so Gurdjieff's questions was, well, these states could be very helpful, but how to get there and how to stay there. And he found that this is very, very difficult. And in a sense, all religions and all spiritual paths attempt in some way, shape or form to be able to lift us, sometimes drag us out of these very low, coarse states where we're literally unable to think, but only react. So his system was very much in an energetic sense. We need more energy, but the right kind of energy. Not kind of donkey work, just doing lots and lots, but a quality. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but in worship or prayer, there can be something that enters, call it the Holy Spirit, that suddenly lifts me. I'm changed. I'm very different. I understand something a little differently. I'm there with something a little different, and then the next moment I plummet back down to where I was. And so his quest was, okay, very practically, through work, not through wishful thinking or taking loads of drugs or trying to seek thrills, but how do we, in everyday life, whatever that we're doing, how can just we be there a little more and be open to something and find our way there so we can return again and again and not wait for something to happen to us, to be a bit more conscious with our being. And of course, he brought a whole series of practices, some music, some dances, some movements, as they are called, because in his view, the way to help move to a higher state in ourselves and sustain it is by first cleaning house, getting our house in order, being able to connect the mind, the body, the soul, to make sure there's a relationship, that there's some balance. In his view, when we're out of balance, when the mind takes control or just the emotions take control or the body takes control, then we're all higgledy-piggledy. And this quality of energy then finds it very difficult to find a place in us because it gets kind of ricocheted around. So our first obligation is, how can I just align myself a little? And something as simple as what we just tried. Can I just consciously soften and relax the body, which is interesting because one can't force relaxation. It's a very different effort. It's almost like a calling. I almost invite my body to just let go. Something frees up in me, whatever that is. And then how does my feelings, my emotions connect with my body, and my mind connect with my feelings and my body? And for Gurdjieff, this was this faculty of attention that could be this medium, this catalyst to allow these relationships to occur. So how to train this attention? Well, it's very difficult. Our attention, particularly in modern life, is very much captured everywhere you go. Marketing and the advertising area is wonderful. It's showing you shiny things and really pulling your attention away. The internet is a master at it. So how to keep some of this attention available for my own work, for my own use. So, for example, listening is really difficult. Well, at least I find it very difficult. How can I stay connected and grounded to really listen to someone and receive what they have to say? Well, I have to be very attentive. I need to be there. I need to have a presence to allow this listening to occur. And listening is not just shutting up. It needs to be an inner listening. And, you know, one can feel that when one's really listening to you. Wow, makes all the difference. You feel as though you've been received. Where someone's just silent and you can see in their mind that they're thinking about the next jobs list or when am I going to shut up and move on. You don't feel as though that's been received. So there's this very interesting interplay that occurs. So Gurdjieff brought some of these techniques and exercises really to make life more simple. Can I be here with whatever I'm doing? And of course, there was an elaborate framework of ideas that he had, where there's a consistent cosmology, anthropology, and psychology that very much lends itself to some of the practices and the exercises that he brought. So just as an example, in the cosmic sphere, he talks about God, in a sense, initiating the creation. And also how sons, when they are born, also initiate a creation. And in a sense, they do that. The sun gives light and heat. Without that, the earth and all life on it wouldn't be available. But he also says that we as humans have faculties in us which can also initiate and create. So there's this resonance between the macro and the micro. The biblical saying that we are created in the image of God. Gurdjieff said that that's probably one of the truest statements made. But what does this image mean? We're a cosmos to ourselves. And there's something very interesting that occurs when I can pay attention to my body, is that it begins this alignment process, which we would feel as being able to relax and soften. Over time, this alignment process can then soften and open the feelings, quieten the mind. And that's something very simple, this very simple act of just paying attention. And everything else follows and everything else flows. So in a sense, one's work, or at least one's part of it, is, can I begin to use this attention more maturely, more wisely? This interesting faculty of initiation, and also that it can create and change the conditions that I have within myself. So I don't know about you, but if I'm needing to really ponder something because there's a big life choice coming up, there's a natural tendency for me, and I think probably most people, is to stop, pause, collect oneself, which literally is what attention means, and then to think about it and make a choice. There's this instinctive sense that if I can collect myself, which Gurdjieff would say through the power of attention, then there is a better chance that I'll make more appropriate choices and act on them. If I make those choices through the reactionary, fragmented state that I'm normally in, most likely will be a poor choice. So Gurdjieff's work, in a sense, was trying to help people become more alert to the situation. And throughout his teaching career, it really kind of divided people. No one likes to be told that they're asleep. No one likes to be told that they're not awake. That is a real ego blow. And for him, the ego is a two-edged sword. It's one of the things that can drive us to strive to do something and be something, but it's also the very thing that can blind us for the very thing that we need. And then over the course of his teaching career, he had many students, and they seemed to travel the globe. He attempted to establish an institute in the 20s and 30s, which for a number of reasons he closed, and he worked with small groups of people. He then ended up spending the remaining years in France, particularly during World War II. And then after he had died, there was a bit of a spreading of his system, particularly through some of the books that he had written. But he really wasn't well known. Then there was a film made broadly on his life off one of the books in about 1978. Meetings with Remarkable Men. You may have seen it online. And then since then, there's been a number of groups from the mainstream lines, that is either from Gurdjieff himself or from his students who've effectively gone all across the globe, in England, in France, in the South American area, here. And we now have quite a public consciousness on Gurdjieff. I'm surprised at how well known he is, or how some of his ideas, which when he first came were very radical, have been incorporated into various mainstream groups or even science. So he's had quite an impact. For me, what attracted me to Gurdjieff is I had the same sorts of questions. I was raised in a Christian family, which I was blessed, but also I have very much a science mind. How do things work? I can't just accept an opinion. I want to know myself. I want the evidence. I want the logic. And I also want to be practical. I'm not so much interested in theory. I'm interested in what the theory can do for my life and those around me. And so after a series of experiences and a collapse morally, really, a sense that I couldn't stand my inner chaos anymore because I could not find a way out of it, I happened to come across Gurdjieff's works. And I felt that his questions were my questions. And then I just started to become more and more involved, very skeptical, and wanted to test many of his claims, which I have done, and there are many more to test. But I've found, and this is in the Gurdjieff method itself, that one needs to verify everything. And I followed that principle. And I found it to be very helpful for my life and also others. And also one of the remarkable things at how it renewed my Christian faith. I began to read the Gospels and the Bible in a very different way. So I've been very privileged to travel that journey. And now, in a sense, having come through some of the more mainstream groups and been in contact with many other people from many other faiths, and also having this sense now that the last 10 to 20 years have changed dramatically, particularly in the digital age, there's this sense of this question of how to bring this to light and help others engage with it, particularly younger folk who seem to engage with things very, very differently now. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. And so this really is a question for me to explore, how to bring some of that essentialness of the Gurdjieff work out into the light a little and find a way to engage with this world that is just changing dramatically. So that's kind of things in a nutshell, but happy to explore anything else that anyone wishes to bring or respond to any questions.
Thank you very much, Luke. I'll open it to questions for those who have them. Just be aware if your microphone needs to be unmuted if you want to say something.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Heather.
I did read one book that was about Gurdjieff, and I think it was called The Fourth Way.
Yes.
Possibly about 7 years ago. I did find there's similarities to Swedenborg stuff, but I couldn't tell anyone back now what I learnt about it. But I mean, that's typical of me. I'm in my 70s now and I'm just forgetting so much. One of the things that was told to me by a minister, David Miller, was that there was a particular dance on YouTube that from America that Gurdjieff's people were doing, and I watched it. I felt as though they were opening up gates and things like that, and it just reminded me of something that they might have learnt from Kabbalah or something like that. But I didn't really know why they thought it was so helpful in dancing in a sort of like a meditative state or something. I haven't ever gone back and watched it again. I have completely forgotten about it until, you know, I saw that you were coming up and talking. I mean, what I'm saying is just rambling on. I'm not asking a question, but one question I will ask is, do you know if you've got anyone here in Adelaide that's interested in Gurdjieff?
Yes, I do know of a group in Adelaide, and I can send you, if you want, the details of that.
Yep.
I believe it is, the details are still on the Gurdjieff, the Gurdjieff Society of Australia's homepage. They have a little contact button there, and I'm pretty sure someone from Adelaide is on that. I used to know them. I haven't had much contact with them in the last few years, but I'm also happy to send that through to David.
Right, that'd be great. Yeah.
Anything you send to me, I will pass on to the folk who are here. That's absolutely fine. Thank you. Yeah.
But maybe just to go back, Heather, to your question on the movements or the dances, one of the objectives is this control and trying to strengthen one's attention. Is easy when you're sitting still. It's still hard, but it's easy when you're sitting still and quiet at home. One can be more collected and calm and more thoughtful. But as soon as you go out into the midst of life, where there's lots of people and cars and one's attention is just zapped away. So as an intermediary step, if you like, the dancers and the movements are trying to help the dancer to begin to strengthen one's attention while in movement. In a strange way, this is what athletes try to do when they're trying to fine-tune and be precise, but their emphasis is a little different. Having done many movements and dances myself, it's incredibly difficult, but there can become moments where there is this very interesting alignment between the clarity and power of one's attention to be able to connect and relate with the body and feelings. And one feels very alive and very much meeting the situation, no matter what it is. And so one of the objectives of those exercises is, can I strengthen my attention and my connection so that when I'm in the midst of life, particularly amongst people or something very difficult, that I have a chance, because I've experienced it through the dances and movements, to connect in the difficult realities of life. So in a way, it's being able to help bring something out from one's practices right out into the midst of life. It's the same, for example, of what we just tried a little earlier. Can I, for example, remain connected with my hand as I'm cutting up the veggies, as I'm doing the gardening. And through experience, something changes when I'm a bit more attentive. The body is a bit more coordinated. I have a greater sense of where my body is and how it relates to what's going on inside. And just in a very practical way, that can be a big help. But also in another way, it can help ground me. So maybe I'm not as rattled as much if someone starts yelling at me. So it's not so much trying to control anyone or anything, but it's trying to just strengthen this innate capacity that we all have to be a little bit more present. And there's something that occurs if I can bring that quality out into life. My life might flow a little differently. I know for me, for example, prone to anger, there's been some wonderful moments, rare moments, but wonderful moments where all of that work comes to the fore. And there's been a moment where I've been a little bit more connected and a little bit more present, where I've had the choice to restrain, where otherwise I wouldn't have. I would just go with the anger, all sorts of damage occurs, and then happen to feel remorse afterwards, and then do a lot of apologizing. So it's just, the dances are a way of really trying to test oneself in the conditions where it's safe through the dances and through the movements. So I can then begin to explore that in the midst of life very gently and with maturity and with some intelligence, so that I can bring this out.
Do you think that the word attention is the same thing as mindfulness, as what they're trying to teach in New Age places? And here in Adelaide, we've got the WEA, which is the Working Man's Education Association, and they do courses on mindfulness. Do you think that the attention, what you're talking about, attention, is the same as mindfulness?
It might be related, but not the same.
Oh.
So what I've found, and this is just my view and others might take issue, but often the word consciousness or mindfulness or awareness is used in a very general sense. In the sense that I speak of, one can be generally aware of the contents, if you'd like. Like, for example, you might be aware of just generally of the room that you're in. But the power of attention is, are you able to control that to an extent that at will you're able to focus on something without being pulled away from it? And that's something that's quite different, something that needs to be trained, because you can have a general awareness, and there are many practices that promote a general awareness, but can I really pay attention and be focused on something? It's like when you're using a knife to cut something. There's this general awareness of where you are, but there's also then, at the moment of using that instrument that is very close to your fingers, there is something that you really need to mobilize in yourself for safety. That you collect and you focus something so you don't cut yourself, or you use that instrument, that knife, in the right way rather than the wrong way. That's more closely what I call attention, to be able to collect oneself, which is what attention means, and to focus it, rather than just a general awareness. And it's a very different thing to be able to exercise and practice. It's like when one's reading a book. If you've ever had this experience where you've read 3 or 4 pages and yet you can't recollect what you read.
All the time.
There's just a smell of it. So you were aware, you're generally aware, but it's not until you maybe come across a passage that hits you. And all of a sudden you go, wow, what's this? And you really pay attention to it. It's like the feelings are engaged, even the body's engaged. You bring the book closer to yourself. You want as if you want to burn those words into you. That's the attention that I'm talking about. That's the attention. It's something that you can help to direct and collect. And generally, Gurdjieff would say, we very rarely use that or exercise that faculty in that way. And so by training it, more than just general awareness, but training to just, can I keep my attention focused and sustain it rather than having it hopping about left, right, and center? That there's other perceptions then that can be received.
I have read a book by Wayne Dwyer many years ago. He's dead now, but yeah, he talks about this inattention and attention sort of thing, and you know, it really makes you become aware of how you allow your mind to drift and things like that.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. I'm not really aware of several books, like you said, that Gurdjieff has written, but where does Christianity come into it with Gurdjieff?
So back in the Russian period, he was recorded by P.D. Ouspensky, one of his famous students, as saying that the fourth way was Christian in its essentials, and that the aim of the fourth way was to make one a Christian, in that those who can follow the commands of Christ. Now, he qualified that very few people are Christians. They might call themselves Christians, but his test was, can you follow the commands of Christ? Can you love God with all your heart, your mind, your spirit, your body, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself? I can't. I try. I can't. So he said that his work, in a sense, is candidature to be a Christian. And that the aim, if one could really do that, then one would be able to emulate Christ, which of course Christian means that little Christs. You know,
or could it mean the Christ within you?
Well, yes, but how does one connect with that? And this is certainly my experience, you know, how do you love your enemy? It's easy to say that in theory, but as soon as someone insults me, or as soon as someone slaps me in the face, I just go into a rage and want to kill them. Well, that's what he's talking about. He's saying, well, in order to do that, what's needed? Well, for starters, I need to love Christ's commands more than my own reactions. I need to sacrifice all of that guff. So how? I need to work at it. Well, okay, how does one do that? You know, in the Christian world, there's all sorts of practices that help support that endeavor. So when he talks about his work being Christian in essence, it's really talking about, well, if we're serious about being Christians or wanting to be Christians, there's a pretty high standard. And I don't know about you, but I'm far from it. And so rather than imagining we're Christ-like, well, let's take stock of where we are. Let's take stock of kind of bearing what he would call sleep, or our far awayness from the commands of Christ, and feeling that, really feeling that as a motivator to try that next effort, to try that next thing. How can I wake up today and come inside more, connect with something more that can feed this yearning to do what our Lord says, but I am unable to do yet?
I wonder, Luke, you've spoken about the transformation of your view of the scriptures. And I wonder if you could expand on that a little, please.
Well, so, and probably this is how it's received as a child by most people growing up in the church. There's lots of whys and whats. Why follow the precepts of Christ? Why study the scriptures? Salvation, because it's good for you, helps the community, all these. And yes, that all seems very commonsensical. Seems to have worked relatively well for the last however many thousands of years. I'd hate to think without the Bible where this world would be. But it really didn't give me the how. And after sort of traveling the journey of some of the Gurdjieff practices and some of the reasoning behind the practices and understanding them, when I read and went back to the Gospels and some of the things that are said, watch ye, for ye not know the hour. Keep awake, not sleep. The body is the temple of the Spirit. All of these things then started to, okay, all these little sayings in the gospel that Christ happens to mention. Even in prayer, God knows what you need even before you need it. Pray in private, not with vain repetitions, which really means with quality. To pray with all one's heart, one's mind, one's soul, one's body, to bring it all in with potency. All of a sudden, that's in a way, that's what I've been trying, and that's what I can apply to my own Christian faith that then starts to invigorate it. It's not the only way, there are many ways, but it was just coming through that way. I saw the scriptures in a different light, that in a sense, many of the hows were there, but increasingly there's a little bit of a gap. Because in my view, the way that the world has kind of moved, in a sense, we all start further away from the scripture. And we need a help. We need some practical things to bring us a little closer to it first, before we start to understand some of the unique practicalities which are there, where maybe 2,000 years ago, particularly being in the presence of Christ, that wasn't needed, because the message was just direct. It affected the being of the apostles to such an extent that they went to martyrdom. So in a way, I felt, and Gurdjieff says this himself, was his work was trying to restore something essential that had been lost to help modern people come back to their faith, in a sense, whether it's Christian or Muslim, but he certainly identified the Christian faith as what he felt in its original form of Christ as being the best one, both now and into the future. But in a sense, he said we needed to reconstruct it for ourselves. Yes, one relies upon Scripture, but one needs to reconstruct it and restore it in oneself, which aids in that relationship of Christ and God.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to bring?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question, please. Luke, I do believe you said that Gurdjieff was probably born or lived in the 1860s.
Yes.
But then you mentioned that a lot of his work or activity was between the First and Second World Wars.
Yes.
Well, he would have been quite an older man then.
Yes. Most of his critical teaching period occurred from in his later life.
Right.
In his
Now-
40s, 50s, and particularly in his 60s and
Well-
onwards. Yes.
So what did he do for a living in the 1800s? Way back then, there was no electricity, no cars. It was a totally different age. But now today, we are living in a different age anyway.
Mm.
With electricity, cars, that yes, you go out of your home, well, not your home, but out onto a highway, and there's lots of cars going to work and things like that. So it would be very hard for people to practice Gurdjieff concentration when they have to be focused on sort of like getting to work and then doing the work that is required of them in this stage. What did Gurdjieff do for a living himself?
Well, maybe just to
repair things like
Here.
glasses, watches, all sorts of things. He had a little business going with a lot of craftsmen. And at the end of his life, he said there's not one object that he couldn't repair. They had a little forge going so they could, bend and melt metal and stuff like that. And he did that for many years. That was his job, his income. That's all these journeys with remarkable men.
So if I heard you right, Leo, you said he was a craftsman?
Yeah.
Okay.
He could even repair a pair of spectacles. And you need a little welder. Well, you have to be able to smelt metal because it didn't have plastic frames in those days. They were nearly all metal. And you had to repair stuff like that. I don't remember where it was, but it was out in the sticks somewhere in probably Russia.
Yes, okay.
Oh, so that was one of the other thing I was wondering. So he was born in Russia and brought up in Russia?
more in the Caucasus area.
Where's the Caucasus area?
And do you know where Armenia is?
Yes, that's sort of
Western
like
sort of
in
Europe,
part of Europe. Yes.
Yeah, close to Russia, sort of in that
It's in
area.
between Turkey and Russia, the Caucasus.
Yes. So he would have been alive after the Russian Revolution happened, and Marx, they were all Marxists then, weren't they?
They were
Well, not
Bolsheviks
everyone.
after World War One. There was the Bolshevik Revolution. But just to come back, yes, he was a very astute businessman, but also very interestingly, some of the most intensive teaching periods between World War One and World War Two, but particularly World War Two, where many of the meetings that he had held in Paris, people literally risked their lives to go to those meetings and to be part of the teaching because of the Nazi regime. And there were a number of stories of some of the trials and tribulations and the persecution.
Was that
that
In the after the World War II?
during World War II. He was
During World War II.
in Paris, yes, during World War II.
Oh.
So he
I'm
was
sure I have
right in the thick of
seen.
it.
I'm sure I have seen on television where he was like the Russian royalty even believed in what he was saying and had him at court to speak to him, sort of thing. Is that right, or am I getting mixed up with someone else?
No, his wife was a lady in waiting in the Tsarist court, Lady Ostrowska. So he tended to mix in all sorts of circles. So his life was, yeah, filled and was very interesting. As he himself would said, he lived 100 lives. And yet, you know, he insisted on whatever normal life that we had and whatever work there. Our capacity for inner work was far greater.
Who's that other chap that lived in the court that used to predict things?
Rasputin?
Oh, yeah, Rasputin. So he would be about the same kind of time?
I think so, roughly, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd have to do a lot more reading on a few more things.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Luke, thanks very much for that presentation. I thought it was very, very, very strong, but very helpful presentation that you made. I thought it was really great for it. A couple of things really. One is just a bit interested to hear a little bit more about these dancing practices that he advocated. I seem to remember going to a talk a good number of years ago in Sydney, and there were references to the whirling dervishes. Am I right there that that was one of the ones that he was, I don't know whether he practiced that himself, but he was advocating?
Well, he was certainly well aware of them and incorporated portions of them into the dance from the dervishes. But he seemed to have gotten many of his movements and dances from all over, from Asia, the Tibetan area, from the dervishes. And when one gets a bit acquainted with the dances, there's certain types of dances for certain things, some which are very affirming, very kind of in the masculine sense. There are others which one needs to be more receptive in the feminine sense. Then there are others which are in between, others which really stretch your attention, others which require very much a gentle, smooth precision. So there's all sorts of movements that he brought to help activate various sides of ourselves. Really with this goal, if you'd like, well, one goal, to help this alignment. Can I be aligned in movement? Can I stay connected in movement? Which really for him is life. Life is always about movement. Something's always changing. And how do I keep something alive in me? Because for him, as we get older, there is always a risk that something dies. Something starts to slow down. Something becomes more mechanical. Something starts to shrink. And for him, how do we keep that alive? How do we bring an intelligence to it that while the body might start to deteriorate, which is natural, can we keep something? Can we keep the spirit alive? Can we nourish it? Can we nourish it? And so all of these things are about trying to help. But at the end of the day, regardless of the exercises or dances or ideas, it's all about, can I bring it all as best I can into life and practice it in life?
Is there any way of seeing the dances on a video or reading about them in any books at all that, you know, are generally available?
Yes,
That
yes,
sort of
there
interest?
is. I'll send some links through to you, David,
Yes.
on some of the dances. Some of the most well-known ones are in the film Meetings with Remarkable Men, which was filmed by Peter Brook, quite famous. I think he's recently died. But I'll send some links. There are many others, and also variants, and there are many groups around the world working with them. But just to make a point, the dances are just an aid for life. And if they're looked in that sense, then, and while they can be a wonderful spectacle, they serve a purpose. They serve.
And there's the Enneagram too. That's a fascinating thing where all the people on Earth are divided into 9 possible characters. When you see anyone talk about them, you simply can't deny it. But we'll all fit into one of those 9 characters, every one of us. Which is not to say that, you know, we're not individuals. Don't get wrong on that aspect. But you know, there's 9 types of us, human beings. And Gurdjieff explains it, and there's a lot of people out there who lecture on it. And I've never seen one that hasn't sounded like pure common sense. So look it up, the Enneagram.
So I presume, Luke, you're aware of the Enneagram. Is anything you wanted to say about it?
Having studied it, and still doing so, it's a very interesting symbol that was only brought by Gurdjieff in the form that he brought it. And yes, it can be applied to types of people, but also his 2 fundamental laws, the law of 7 and the law of 3, which represent for him the fundamental essentials, if you'd like, of work. Because the symbol, while it's a static symbol, is actually one that needs to be visualized in movement, and the relationship between these laws, which effectively goes something like this, that the law of 3, that there's really, it's called by another name, the law of relationship, that there's always 3 things needed in a relationship. Something that affirms, something that receives, and something that reconciles. Both the thing that affirmed and the thing that received. In the Christian sense, what reconciles is the Holy Spirit. It finds a way, often between polar opposites. This affirming and receiving, this yes, this no, this right, this wrong. Something else needs to come in.
Buddha's also said about that 3. First there was 1, then there was 2, and when there was 3, the 10,000 things appeared.
Sorry, I missed that last bit. I apologize.
At first there was 1, then there was 2, and when it became 3, the 10,000 things appeared.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes.
the 3.
And we see this law of 3 in life, you know, protons, neutrons, electrons, biological kind of systems, enzymes. There's a 3rd thing in this kind of reaction. We see it in the child-parent kind of relationship. There's the 2 parents, and then
ingredients of gunpowder. Gunpowder is comprised of 3 ingredients. That's extraordinary, isn't it? You get an explosion from it.
Yes, yes. So there's, seems to be these 3 relationships which are needed. And then he talks about the law of 7, which is, in a sense, how processes or aspects of things unfold. And he talks about why things never go in a straight line. While we start off with one intention, and after a while it ends up being its opposite. We go from the gospel of love to the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah.
We go from loving thy neighbor to killing them. There's this law that works, and if we're more cognizant or conscious of maybe how these laws can influence things, then maybe we can help sustain something on a straighter line rather than it coming back at us. And there's many examples of that, but it's a very interesting symbol to study, particularly mathematically, for any of those who are inclined to do so. Some interesting mathematics about it.
I think it's interesting what you said about us diverting from the straight line and losing our attention and losing our connection. And what I've found is that happens a lot to me. For example, when I'm trying to pray, I find it helps if I involve my body and actually say the words out loud, and have the right posture. And if I prepare beforehand so that I don't get distracted and start, have a double mind, one part of my mind here and the other part thinking about, I don't know, what I had for dinner or something. That if I prepare beforehand by saying, I am single-minded, it sort of blocks out the interference, and I'm more able to just focus and have that connection that I'm seeking.
Yes. Well, you know, Christ used his body in prayer. I'm sure if you're aware of the Muslim Salah, the prostrations that they do, there's a very similar one in the early church. And I also practice that. But when one brings the body in, and it can be with anything, whether it's trying to prostrate or dance, or even with prayer beads, which its major purpose is to involve the body. Yes, it's something to remind how many prayers, but when I've got something in my hand and I need to consciously be moving my fingers and know where I am, it helps in alignment. I need to bring the body in. I need to bring the mind in. And I need to also bring my feeling to it. Why am I praying? Am I just saying words? Well, who's it for? I need to feel that. And I need to ache, you know?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luke. I think we might round off now, given the time. It's been fascinating. I've heard certain things about Gurdjieff, and I understand a certain amount, but you've really filled that out for me, and I've learned new aspects. I hadn't heard about the dancing, for example. So, you know, it's good to have that filled out. So, very much appreciate your taking the time to share with us. And for those of you who are here and want to revisit, the talk will go up on YouTube and on the website very shortly, so you'll be able to revisit what Luke's shared with us tonight. I'll just mention our next meeting will be the last Friday in August, as usual. I will be talking at that particular occasion, and what I'm going to do is focus on one of the questions that has come up in the feedback forms from previous events. So the question was, why did God leave it so late to teach other religions the truth and things spiritual? So we'll just address that question from Swedenborg's point of view in August. And then I'll just let you know there won't be a meeting in September because Neville will be away, I think, still, and I will be away also. So we'll have to then jump over September to October, but I'll let you know what's coming up in future meetings. Okay. And there will also, the other thing, just to let you know, as I've done in previous couple of meetings, I'll send a feedback form for you to fill in, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about tonight's meeting and future events. Now, Neville, you wanted to say?
I was just going to, can I just ask Luke a question?
Yes, go for it.
Luke, I just wonder whether you've come across a book called Observing Spirit by Peter Rhodes. It's
No, I
it's
haven't.
one that was published by our organisation in America, Swedenborg Foundation, and he actually sort of like compares the teachings of Gurdjieff with the teachings of Swedenborg. And reading that many years ago, I had hoped there'd be a copy here that we could let you have, but I can get one from Sydney. I just wonder whether you'd be interested to read it. That's all.
I would certainly be interested if you can send me a link on how to purchase a copy. That would be great.
I think we can do better than that. But anyway.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Look,
well,
can I ask Luke one more question, please?
that's fine. Heather,
I just wanting to know, have you ever read any books that Emanuel Swedenborg wrote?
I haven't read any of his books, but I've certainly read much online and have spoken to someone who has read a great deal of books. I am not qualified in any way, shape or form to speak about Swedenborg. What I can say, he was clearly a remarkable man.
And I think there's, I listened to what you said tonight, and there's many overlaps.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The whole idea of being asleep, for example, the idea you talked about the image of God in man, and I think of the fractal.
Yes.
We are the fractal in the smallest way, and the Lord in the heavens is the fractal in the largest. And there's so many overlaps. I think it's just wonderful. It's been fabulous to hear.
Mhm.
Well, thank you everyone for having me. I appreciate connecting with like-minded folk. God bless.